Humanity has always stood on the edge of a razor, one misstep away from chaos, one act of defiance from annihilation. Think about it. We build empires, craft legends, and reach for the stars, yet beneath it all, we're fragile. A single spark of rebellion, a moment of divine displeasure, and everything we know can crumble. And nowhere is this truth more starkly illustrated than in one of ancient Egypt's most chilling myths, the Book of the Heavenly Cow. This isn't just a story, it's a warning etched in hieroglyphs, a tale of gods pushed to their limits and the terrifying consequences when mortals dare to defy them. Picture Egypt in its golden age, bathed in the unyielding light of Ra, the sun god. For centuries, he's ruled with wisdom and power, his presence a constant as reliable as the Nile's floods. But even gods grow weary, and as Ra ages, something shifts among the people. Whispers turn to murmurs, murmurs to defiance. The very humans Ra nurtured begin to plot against him, their hearts poisoned by ambition and ingratitude. What happens next isn't just divine retribution, it's a cataclysm that reshapes the world itself. The Book of the Heavenly Cow doesn't just recount a myth, it unveils a moment where the balance between gods and humanity snaps, where the heavens themselves reel from the fallout. This is a story of fire and fury, of a god's heartbreak turning to wrath, but it's also a story about us, about the fine line between order and chaos, between reverence and ruin. Why would the ancient Egyptians preserve such a terrifying narrative? What does it reveal about their fears, their understanding of the divine, and the precariousness of existence? By the time we're done, you'll see this myth not as some dusty relic, but as a mirror held up to our own world where power, loyalty, and the consequences of defiance still echo today. So let's step into the shadows of the past, where the fate of humanity hung in the balance, and the gods decided enough was enough. To understand the full weight of humanity's rebellion, you first have to grasp the sacred order that held ancient Egypt together, the principle of Mat. Imagine Mat as the invisible thread weaving through the cosmos, keeping the Nile's floods predictable, the sun's journey across the sky unwavering, and the hearts of the people just. It wasn't just balance, it was the very essence of existence, the reason the world didn't collapse into chaos. And at the center of it all stood Ra, the sun god, not just as a ruler but as the living embodiment of this order. His light didn't just illuminate the world, it sustained it. Every sunrise was a victory over the lurking darkness, and every sunset a temporary surrender before his inevitable return. This was the Golden Age, an era where Ra's rule meant prosperity so abundant it felt eternal. Crops flourished, laws were fair, and the gods walked among humanity without fear. Temples rose in his honor, not out of obligation but gratitude, because under Ra, life wasn't just survivable, it thrived. But here's the cruel irony, the very stability Ra provided bred complacency. When the river always floods on time, when the sun never fails to rise, it's easy to forget the hands, or in this case, the god holding it all together. The people grew accustomed to peace, to abundance, until they mistook it for entitlement. They began to whisper that Ra was old, that his power had waned, that perhaps they didn't need him at all. What they didn't realize was that Mat wasn't a given, it was a covenant. Ra's rule wasn't just about authority, it was a sacred duty, a burden carried for the sake of creation itself. And when humanity forgot that, when they traded reverence for arrogance, they didn't just insult a god, they threatened to unravel the fabric of the world. The coming chaos wasn't just divine punishment, it was the inevitable collapse when the threads of Mat were pulled too hard. The Golden Age wasn't ending because Ra willed it, it was ending because humanity, in its hubris, let go of the very order that had cradled them. The whispers started small, murmurs in the shadows of temples, muttered grievances between laborers as they toiled under the sun Ra had gifted them. At first, it was just discontent, the natural grumbling of any people under any ruler. But as Ra's golden years stretched on, the murmurs twisted into something darker. He grows weak, they said, his light dims. The god who had once been their unshakable foundation now seemed to them a fading relic, his wisdom mistaken for frailty, his patience for neglect. And so, in their arrogance, they plotted, not openly, not yet, but in the hidden spaces where rebellion takes root. This wasn't just petty defiance. In the world of gods and men, rebellion carried cosmic stakes. Ra wasn't merely a king, he was the anchor of Maat, the force that kept chaos at bay. To challenge him wasn't just political, it was sacrilege, an unraveling of the divine order itself. Yet the people, intoxicated by their own ambition, convinced themselves they could do better. They sharpened weapons in secret, forged alliances in hushed tones, and even dared to raise their voices in outright defiance. Some myths say they summoned the serpent Apophis, Ra's eternal enemy, as their ally, a betrayal so profound it scorched the heavens. But here's the chilling parallel: this wasn't just myth. The pharaohs of Egypt, believed to be gods incarnate, faced real rebellions throughout history. When drought withered the Nile or invaders pressed at the borders, the people's faith wavered. They questioned, they revolted. The myth of Ra's betrayal mirrors those moments of crisis where divine authority was tested by human desperation. The ancients understood that to rebel against a god-king wasn't just treason, it was a gamble with existence itself. And in the story of the heavenly cow, humanity was about to learn just how high the stakes truly were. What's fascinating is how the myth doesn't paint Ra as some distant tyrant. He's weary, yes, but he's also heartbroken. He hears the plots, sees the knives glinting behind his back, and his response isn't immediate fury, it's grief. "What have I done to deserve this?" he asks the other gods, his voice heavy with sorrow. Here lies the tragedy. The people forgot that Ra's rule wasn't oppression. It was a covenant. His light nurtured their crops, his laws shielded them from chaos. Their rebellion wasn't just against a god, it was against their own survival. And so, with a heavy heart, Ra makes his decision. If humanity no longer wants his protection, they will learn what it means to face the world without it. But his punishment won't be swift or simple. It will be calculated, a lesson etched in fire and blood. The stage is set for one of mythology's most terrifying acts of divine retribution, one that doesn't just punish, but reshapes the very relationship between gods and mortals forever. Ra didn't act alone. When the weight of humanity's betrayal became too heavy, he called upon the Aeneid, the circle of gods who shaped the world itself. Picture them gathering in the hushed shadows of the celestial court. Shu, the god of air, whose breath filled the lungs of creation. Tefnut, the lioness of moisture, her presence both life-giving and fierce. Jeb, the earth beneath their feet, and Nut, the sky arched above, their bodies eternally stretched between heaven and soil. These weren't just advisors, they were the architects of existence, the ones who had woven Maat into the fabric of reality. And now they stood in silent horror as Ra, their king, their son, confessed the unthinkable humanity had turned against him. The atmosphere in that divine council was thick with tension. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a trial. The gods had witnessed rebellions before, but never like this. Never against Ra, Shu's winds stilled, Tefnut's claws unsheathed. Even Nut, whose body cradled the stars, seemed to shudder at the blasphemy. But it was Nun, the ancient waters of chaos, who spoke first. As the eldest of them all, his voice carried the weight of eternity. "They have forgotten their place," he murmured, the words rippling like the primordial tides he embodied. But destruction is not the only path. Nun's wisdom cut through the anger like a cool current. He had existed before light, before order, before Ra himself. He knew the cost of unchecked fury. If you annihilate them, he warned, you unravel your own legacy. Their worship sustains you, their hands build your temples. Strike them down, and you sever the very bonds that give you strength. The other gods shifted, uneasy. They had come expecting vengeance, but none offered something far more terrifying: consequence. Not a swift end, but a reckoning that would force humanity to confront the void they'd invited. Ra listened, his golden brow furrowed. He could have unleashed Sekhmet, the lioness of war, to drown the world in blood. He could have let Apophis swallow the sun whole, but Nun's words lingered. This punishment needed to be more than pain, it needed to be a lesson, a reminder that without the gods, humanity was nothing. The decision they reached wasn't just about justice, it was about balance, a way to humble without erasing, to chastise without obliterating the very creation they cherished. And so, with a solemn nod, Ra agreed. The heavens would not fall, but they would change forever. What came next wasn't mere wrath, it was precision. A divine scalpel carving into the relationship between gods and mortals, leaving scars that would echo through every prayer, every offering, every moment of doubt. The Ennead's verdict set the stage for a reckoning so profound it would redefine the boundaries of the world itself. Humanity had asked for freedom from Ra's light. They were about to discover what freedom truly cost. The moment Ra gave his consent, the very air trembled. From the fury in his heart, from the molten gold of his divine essence, he summoned his most fearsome weapon, the Eye of Ra. This wasn't just a symbol, it was a living force, a manifestation of his will given shape and teeth. And in this moment of reckoning, the eye took the form of a goddess both beautiful and terrible, Sekhmet. Some versions of the myth name her as Hathor, the gentle cow goddess of love, twisted by wrath into something unrecognizable. But make no mistake, by any name, she became destruction incarnate. Her body was a lioness's, muscles coiled like serpents beneath tawny fur. Her eyes burned with the sun's own fire, and her claws dripped with venom sharper than any mortal blade. This was no mindless beast. Sekhmet moved with purpose, with divine calculation. Ra didn't just unleash chaos, he unleashed justice distilled into a single, relentless predator. As she descended from the heavens, the sky itself seemed to bleed, stained crimson by her presence. The people below, those who had whispered against Ra, who had raised weapons in defiance, looked up and froze. Their rebellion had been born in shadows, in secret, but Sekhmet's vengeance would be painted across the world in daylight, impossible to ignore, and then she began. The myths describe her rampage in visceral detail. She didn't just kill, she reveled in it. Villages that had echoed with plots against Ra became feasting grounds. Sekhmet's jaws snapped bones like twigs, her roar shaking the earth as laughter might shake a mortal's chest. The Nile, once life-giving, ran red with the evidence of her wrath. Yet here's what makes this more than a simple tale of punishment. Sekhmet's violence wasn't indiscriminate. She sought the guilty, those who had actively turned against Ra, but in her fury, the line between conspirator and bystander blurred. Bloodlust intoxicated her. The more she drank of it, the more she craved. This is where the myth takes a terrifying turn. Sekhmet, meant to be an instrument of balance, became something unchecked. The gods watched from on high as her slaughter spiraled beyond their intent. What began as divine justice teetered on the brink of annihilation, not just of the rebels, but of humanity itself. And Ra, despite his anger, hesitated. He had wanted to teach a lesson, not erase his own creation. But could Sekhmet even be stopped now? Her thirst had grown beyond command, beyond reason. The sun god faced a new dilemma: how to halt the very force he'd unleashed before it consumed everything. The answer would come not from strength, but from cunning. From a plan so audacious it would turn the goddess's hunger against itself. But that revelation would come too late for the thousands already lost to her teeth. Sekhmet's rampage wasn't just punishment, it was a glimpse into the abyss that opens when gods and mortals break their covenant, and the worst was yet to come. The myths don't hold back when describing Sekhmet's rampage. They paint the horror in strokes so vivid they sear into the mind. Ancient texts speak of villages reduced to smoldering ruins, their streets slick with gore as Sekhmet's claws tore through flesh like parchment. The air itself grew thick with the metallic tang of blood, so overpowering it clung to the clothes of those hiding in terror. One papyrus fragment describes the Nile's waters churning crimson, fish floating belly up as the river choked on the aftermath of her wrath. This wasn't just killing, it was annihilation turned into an art form. What makes Sekhmet's violence so chilling isn't just its scale, but its intimacy. She didn't obliterate from afar like some distant storm. She hunted. The texts tell of her pacing through alleyways, her golden eyes piercing through the dark to find cowering families huddled beneath overturned carts. Her laughter, deep, resonant, dripping with divine amusement, echoed as she played with her prey, letting them scramble just far enough to feel hope before pouncing. Some accounts even claim she'd pause to lap at pools of blood, her tongue leaving trails in the dust like macabre hieroglyphs of her passage. The psychological torment was as deliberate as the physical slaughter. Survivors, those who'd hidden in cisterns or buried themselves in fields, spoke of her voice slithering into their minds, whispering their sins back to them. You called Ra weak, she'd growl, her breath hot against their necks. Now see what strength truly looks like. It was as if she wanted them to understand, to marinate in their regret before the end. And with every life taken, her fury didn't wane, it fed itself, a self-sustaining inferno. The more she drank of their terror, the brighter her eyes burned, until even the other gods grew uneasy at the glow staining the horizon. Yet the most unsettling detail comes from a temple inscription in Thebes, where priests recorded a chilling observation. Sekhmet didn't just kill the guilty. The weight of her steps cracked the earth, toppling homes onto those who'd never raised a hand against Ra. Children who'd never heard the conspiracies were crushed beneath rubble. Farmers who'd spent their lives tending Ra's sacred barley choked on the same dust their prayers had once risen with. The lesson was brutal in its duality: betray a god, and the consequences would ripple far beyond the traitors. Archaeologists have found evidence that this myth may have mirrored real trauma. Layers of ash in certain ruins, dating to periods of upheaval, suggest catastrophic fires. Some scholars argue these could have inspired the tales of Sekhmet's flames, but whether literal or symbolic, the message was clear: divine wrath wasn't just about justice. It was about reminding humanity of their fragility. The same hands that built temples could be reduced to bones in an instant. The same voices that sang hymns could be silenced mid-prayer. And as Sekhmet's rampage stretched from dawn into the relentless heat of midday, even the sun itself seemed to pulse with her rage, casting shadows that twisted like dying men. The gods watched from their celestial perch, silent. This was what they'd agreed to, but none had anticipated the sheer voracity of her hunger. Ra's vengeance was unfolding exactly as planned. Until suddenly it wasn't, because the real horror wasn't just in the bloodshed. It was in the dawning realization that Sekhmet, once unleashed, might never stop. Even gods can feel regret. As Sekhmet's slaughter stretched into its second day, the rivers of blood pooling across the land began to stir something unexpected in Ra, not satisfaction, but sorrow. The cries of the dying didn't fuel his vengeance. They echoed in his divine chest like mourners' wails at a funeral he never intended to hold. This wasn't the righteous justice he'd envisioned. This was chaos wearing the mask of order. The sun god, who had burned with betrayal just hours before, now watched his own handiwork with a growing heaviness. These weren't just rebels beneath Sekhmet's claws. They were the children of his light, the voices that had once sung his praises at dawn. Their ingratitude had cut him deep, but their suffering cut deeper. Here's the paradox at the heart of the myth. Ra's anger had been real, but so was his love. For all their treachery, humanity remained his creation, shaped from his tears, nurtured by his warmth. To erase them entirely would be to erase part of himself. The other gods sensed the shift in their king. Nut, the sky goddess, cupped the sun in her palms as if to shield it from the carnage below. "They've learned their lesson," she murmured, "haven't they? But stopping Sekhmet now would take more than words." The lioness had tasted divine wrath, and it had intoxicated her. She moved like a sandstorm given sentience, her hunger spiraling beyond anyone's control, even Ra's. Yet where brute force would fail, cunning might succeed. Ra ordered his priests to brew thousands of jars of beer, staining it red with ochre until it mirrored the blood flooding the Nile. As dusk fell, they poured this counterfeit river across Sekhmet's path, the liquid glinting like molten copper in the fading light. The goddess, her muzzle dripping with gore, paused at the sight. The scent of iron filled the air, or so she thought. In her frenzy, she couldn't distinguish slaughter from subterfuge. With a roar of triumph, she plunged her face into the liquid, gulping it down in great, greedy draughts. The beer, thick with sedatives, hit her like a tidal wave. Her limbs grew heavy, her vision blurred. The lioness who had been death incarnate now swayed on her feet, pupils dilated before collapsing into blissful oblivion. When Sekhmet awoke, the fire in her veins had cooled. The bloodlust that twisted her into a monster had been drowned in that crimson haze, leaving behind the gentler form of Hathor, the goddess of love and music. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. The same divine force that could rend flesh from bone could also heal, could forgive. Ra, looking upon her now, saw reflected the duality of his own heart, wrath and mercy, two sides of the same golden coin. But the story doesn't end with Sekhmet's transformation. Ra's mercy came with a price, not for humanity, but for himself. The genocide had shaken him to his core. If his anger could birth such horror, perhaps he was no longer fit to walk among mortals. The sun would still rise, the Nile would still flood, but Ra would reign from a distance, his presence no longer a constant warmth but a distant beacon. The heavens themselves would bear the scars of this reckoning, as Nut arched her body higher above the earth, creating a gulf between gods and mortals that could never again be crossed. The golden age of intimacy was over, and so the myth asks us, was this mercy or retreat? Did Ra spare humanity out of love, or because he couldn't bear to witness the consequences of his own rage? Perhaps both. The gods, like the humans they shaped, were flawed, capable of terrible violence and profound tenderness, often in the same breath. The Book of the Heavenly Cow doesn't offer easy answers. It shows us divinity in all its contradictions, a sun that burns and nurtures, a creator who destroys and redeems, a father who disciplines his children only to weep when they bleed. The solution came not from brute force, but from the kind of cunning that only desperation breeds. As Sekhmet's rampage stretched into its third day, the land drowned under waves of crimson, the gods realized something terrifying: she wouldn't stop on her own. Her bloodlust had become self-sustaining, a feedback loop of carnage where every kill sharpened her hunger for the next. Ra, watching from the celestial bark, saw the truth. To save what remained of humanity, they'd need to outthink the embodiment of destruction itself. Enter the oldest trick in the book, deception. Ra summoned his high priest, his voice low with urgency. "Take 7,000 jars of beer," he commanded, "and stain them until they mirror the Nile's new color." The priests worked through the night, crushing ochre into the liquid until it shimmered like fresh spilled blood under the moonlight. But this wasn't just about color. They laced the beer with mandrake and poppy, herbs known to drag even gods into oblivion. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. If Sekhmet craved blood, they'd give her a river of it, one she couldn't resist. At dawn, as Sekhmet prowled the delta's edge, her nostrils flared at the metallic tang of what she believed was another massacre. Instead, she found fields drowned in scarlet liquid, pools of it glinting like rubies in the rising sun. The myth describes her pause, a heartbeat of hesitation before she plunged her muzzle into the nearest puddle. The taste was off, but the frenzy had dulled her discernment. She drank greedily, lapping at the false blood until her sides bulged. With every gulp, the sedatives coiled tighter around her divine consciousness. Her snarls turned to slurred growls, her steps staggered. The lioness who had torn through armies now wobbled like a cub taking its first steps. By midday, Sekhmet collapsed, her limbs splayed across the mud. The bear's narcotic embrace pulled her into a stupor so deep, her dreams swam with visions of her own slaughter. When she finally awoke, the fire in her veins had cooled. The goddess who rose from that crimson haze was no longer Sekhmet the destroyer, but Hathor the gentle, her form softer, her eyes clear. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. The same power that had turned love to wrath now reversed its course, proving that even divinity could be reshaped by circumstance. Yet the brilliance of Ra's plan lay in its dual lesson. For humanity, it showed that survival sometimes required ingenuity over strength. For the gods, it revealed the danger of unchecked fury, how easily justice could tip into excess. That bear-soaked field became a silent testament to balance, a reminder that even the most terrifying forces could be disarmed with wisdom. And as the last drops of red seeped into the soil, something else took root. The understanding that mercy, however hard won, could rewrite destiny. The moment Sekhmet's eyelids fluttered open, the world held its breath. The lioness who had painted Egypt red now lay sprawled in a field of stained mud, her claws caked with drying beer instead of blood. Something fundamental had shifted not just in her body, but in her essence. The fire that had burned behind her eyes guttered like a torch submerged in water. Her limbs, once coiled with relentless fury, now moved with the languid grace of a creature emerging from a long sleep. As she rose, the sunlight caught her mane, and the transformation became undeniable. The sharp edges of her form softened, her muzzle rounded, her posture less predator than protector. Sekhmet was gone. In her place stood Hathor, the benevolent cow goddess, her horns curling like crescent moons, her eyes shimmering with something dangerously close to remorse. This wasn't just a change of costume. In Egyptian theology, gods weren't locked into singular roles like actors typecast in a play. They were fluid, their natures as mutable as the Nile's currents. Hathor could be the nurturing mother who sang lullabies to the dead in the Duat, or she could become Sekhmet, the storm made flesh. The same hands that cradled newborns could snap spines without hesitation. What the myth reveals is a profound truth about how the ancients saw divinity. Power wasn't just about might, it was about balance. A goddess who could only love would be as incomplete as one who could only destroy. The universe demanded both. Think of it like the Nile's flood cycle. The river didn't just nourish, it annihilated. Villages drowned, granaries washed away. But from that destruction came fertile silt, the black soil that fed a civilization. The Egyptians didn't worship spiteful gods or kind ones. They worshipped forces that encompassed both, because that's what the world required. Hathor Sekhmet embodied this duality in its purest form. Her return to benevolence wasn't a cancellation of wrath, but a reconciliation. The beer that had drugged her also purified her, a symbolic reset where violence and mercy could coexist without consuming one another. Archaeological evidence hints at how deeply this duality was woven into daily life. In temple reliefs, Hathor often wears the sun disk flanked by Uri cobras, symbolizing both protection and deadly fury. Priests performed rituals where they'd offer her red linen and beer during the hottest months, as if to placate the Sekhmet lurking beneath her skin. Even her music held this tension. The sistrum, her sacred rattle, wasn't just for celebration. Its sound was believed to ward off chaos, a reminder that joy and order were fragile things constantly under siege. But here's what's truly fascinating. The myth doesn't end with Hathor's restoration as if the story had rewound to its beginning. Something irreversible had happened. The trust between gods and mortals had been shattered like a wine jar dropped from a great height. Ra, though merciful, would never again walk among humanity as he once had. The heavens receded, the distance between divine and mortal yawned wider, and the world became a place where gods spoke through intermediaries, priests and dreams and animal omens rather than face to face. Yet in that separation lay another kind of wisdom. The Egyptians didn't see the gods as infallible. They saw them as complex, capable of regret and rage and redemption. When Hathor returned to her gentler form, it wasn't an erasure of Sekhmet but an integration. The lioness still prowled beneath her golden skin, a latent potential. And that's the heart of this myth. Balance isn't the absence of chaos, but the wisdom to hold it in check. The same hands that could strangle the world could also cradle it, if only humanity remembered its place in the dance. This duality echoes far beyond ancient temples. Look at any force of nature, fire, flood, storm, and you'll see the same lesson. Destruction and creation aren't opposites, they're partners in an eternal cycle. The Egyptians didn't just fear Sekhmet, they revered her because they understood that a goddess without teeth couldn't protect them. And a love without the capacity for fury wasn't love at all, but indifference. Hathor's transformation wasn't an ending. It was a mirror held up to existence itself, where light cannot exist without the dark it banishes. The fields lay silent in the wake of Sekhmet's rampage, not the peaceful quiet of a resting earth, but the hollow stillness that follows a storm. Those who survived did so by luck or cowardice, huddled in cellars or buried beneath the bodies of their neighbors. When they finally crept out, the world they knew was gone. The air smelled of iron and charred wood. The Nile, once a ribbon of life, now carried bloated corpses downstream like grim offerings, and the sun, Ra's own face, burned down as if nothing had changed. That was the cruelest blow of all. The god who had nurtured them for generations had turned his back, not in anger, but in something far worse, indifference. This wasn't just physical devastation. The survivors carried wounds no herb could mend. Fathers woke screaming, convinced Sekhmet's claws still raked their doorways. Mothers clutched children who would never laugh again, their tiny hands stiff with dried blood. The trauma seeped into the land itself. Crops refused to grow in soil salted by tears. Temples stood empty, their altars cracked as if the gods had shattered them on their way out. The people hadn't just lost homes, they'd lost the certainty that the world made sense. Ma'at, the sacred order they'd taken for granted, had crumbled because of their own arrogance. Now they were left to sift through the rubble of their hubris. But myths aren't just about suffering, they're about meaning, and the Egyptians, even in their grief, wove purpose from the carnage. If Ra no longer walked among them, they needed a new bridge to the divine. Enter the pharaohs. These weren't just kings, they were living conduits between earth and heaven, the only mortals deemed worthy to stand in both realms. The Book of the Heavenly Cow doesn't just recount a punishment, it's a founding document for kingship itself. After the slaughter, the pharaoh's role crystallized. He alone could plead with Ra on behalf of his people. He alone could perform rituals potent enough to keep the gods from slipping further away. Archaeology backs this up. In the aftermath of periods historians call intermediates, times of chaos between dynasties, Egyptian art shifts dramatically. Pharaohs are depicted larger, more godlike, their hands raised not in battle but in prayer. Hieroglyphs from this era stress the king's unique ability to pacify the heart of Ra, as if the sun god's rage still simmered beneath the surface of the world. The message was clear: without a pharaoh, Sekhmet might return, and so the survivors rebuilt not just their cities but their understanding of the cosmos. They inscribed the myth on tomb walls and whispered it during festivals, not as a horror story, but as a warning etched in light and blood. The distance between gods and men wasn't a tragedy, it was a necessity. Ra's withdrawal wasn't abandonment, it was mercy. A father stepping back before his disappointment curdled into something worse. Yet the story leaves one question hanging: did humanity truly learn? The same scrolls that preserve the myth also record rebellions, heresies, pharaohs overthrown. The Egyptians knew better than most that cycles don't break easily. The Heavenly Cow isn't just a tale of the past, it's a mirror. Every time mortals mistake benevolence for weakness, every time they bite the hand that feeds them, the shadow of Sekhmet stirs. Not in the heavens, but in the unquiet corners of their own hearts. Ra gazed down at the ruined world from the deck of his celestial bark, his golden fingers tightening around the scepter that had once governed mortals and gods alike. The carnage below wasn't just a testament to human folly, it was a mirror reflecting his own limits. For the first time in eternity, the sun god felt the weight of his years. His light, once unwavering, now flickered with exhaustion. The closer he stood to humanity, the more their betrayals scorched him. Something had to change. Not just for them, but for himself. That's when Nut stretched her star-studded body across the horizon, her voice a whisper of cosmic logic. "You cannot rule them as you once did," she murmured. Not from among them, the sky goddess had watched the entire tragedy unfold, her celestial form aching from the strain of holding back chaos. Now she offered a solution: distance. Not abandonment, but elevation. If Ra could no longer walk the earth without wrath boiling in his veins, he would reign from a realm where his light could nurture without burning. Nut would become his vessel, not just a throne, but a boundary between divine fury and mortal fragility. What happened next reshaped existence itself. As Ra climbed onto Nut's back, her bovine form arching into the heavens, the first true sunrise ignited the eastern horizon. This wasn't merely a change of address, it was the birth of time's rhythm. Before this moment, Ra's presence had been constant, his light eternal as a lamp in a sealed room. Now his journey across Nut's belly created the very concept of day and night, the sun god's daily death and resurrection. Each dawn became a promise. His return was never guaranteed, but earned through the perilous voyage through the Duat, where Apophis lay in wait. The Egyptians didn't just record this as mythology, they structured their lives around it. Priests timed rituals to the precise moment Ra's bark appeared above the horizon, knowing a second's delay could disrupt the cosmic balance. Farmers planted by the sun's angles, their calendars tracking Nut's body like a divine clock. Even their architecture bowed to this new order: temple corridors aligned so the rising sun would flood the innermost sanctuaries on solstices, lighting the god statue as if reminding him where devotion still burned brightest. But beneath the practicality lay a profound psychological shift. Ra's ascension marked the end of an age where gods and mortals shared the same air. Now divinity became something to chase, a distant fire around which humanity huddled, forever reaching but never touching. The sorrow in this separation birthed their greatest art: pyramids pointing to the heavens, hymns that strained to bridge the gap, and funerary spells begging Nut to lower her belly just enough for the dead to slip into Ra's light. Yet the myth holds a paradox. By retreating, Ra didn't diminish his power, he amplified it. No longer entangled in mortal squabbles, his influence became as pervasive as sunlight itself. The very act of his daily journey across Nut's spine turned the sky into a sacred text, readable to those who knew its language. The reddening of dusk wasn't just sunset, it was the glow of his anger cooling to forgiveness. The pre-dawn gray, the held breath of the world waiting to see if he'd survived the night's trials. This duality, distance as both loss and necessity, echoes in solar myths across cultures. The Greeks had Apollo's chariot, the Aztecs Tonatiuh's bloody ascent, the Hindus Surya's blazing chariot. But the Egyptian version cuts deepest because it's not just about the sun's power. It's about the cost of wielding it. Ra didn't choose the sky out of spite, but because love, unchecked by boundaries, can destroy what it seeks to protect. Every sunrise since has been a reenactment of that first fragile reconciliation. The golden disk cresting the horizon isn't just a star, it's a god deciding once again that the world is worth the light. Nut's transformation into the heavenly cow wasn't just a change of shape, it was the reordering of the cosmos itself. As she arched her star-studded back over the shattered earth, her body stretched into a vault so vast it could cradle the sun. Her legs, once slender and graceful, hardened into the 4 pillars of the sky, each one rooted in the cardinal directions. The texts from royal tombs describe this moment with almost tactile detail, her hooves pressing into the shoulders of Geb, the earth god, while her belly became a pathway for Ra's bark to sail from dawn to dusk. This wasn't just mythology. To the Egyptians, this was the reason the sky didn't collapse, and here's where Shu, the god of air, became the unsung hero of creation. Imagine him standing between his parents, Nut above, Geb below, his arms trembling as he held them apart. His very breath filled the void between earth and sky, a living cushion against gravity's pull. Tomb paintings depict him with feathers in his hair, his body a conduit of wind, his muscles straining under the weight of eternity. But this wasn't just brute strength. Shu's role was sacred balance. Too much force and the sky would crack like pottery, too little and it would crash down onto the world. His presence turned chaos into structure, the first architect of the invisible. Now picture the stars. They weren't just decoration in Nut's celestial hide, they were a map of time itself. Coffin texts from the Middle Kingdom describe them as the imperishable ones, eternal souls who lit the way for both gods and the dead. Some constellations took the shape of beast hippos, crocodiles swimming across Nut's belly as if the sky were a second Nile. Others were the faces of ancestors, their eyes winking from the dark to remind the living that nothing truly ended. The most striking detail, Nut wasn't static. She swallowed Ra each sunset, carrying him through her starry veins until he was reborn from her womb at dawn. The sky wasn't a ceiling, it was a living, breathing thing. Archaeologists have found celestial diagrams in tombs where Nut's body curves over the deceased, her mouth at the western horizon, her loins at the east. These weren't mere decorations, they were blueprints for the soul's journey, showing how the dead could hitch a ride on her currents to reach Ra's light. Even the pyramids, those monumental stairways to heaven, echoed her form, their sloping sides mirroring her arched spine, their capstones piercing the threshold between worlds. But Nut's transformation carried a bittersweet truth. By becoming the heavenly cow, she sacrificed intimacy for stability. No longer could she press her fingers into Geb's soil or whisper directly into the ears of mortals. She was both shield and barrier, close enough to inspire awe but too far for touch. The same distance that protected humanity from Ra's fury also isolated them from his warmth. And yet, every night as her body swallowed the sun, she offered a silent promise. Separation wasn't abandonment. It was the price of survival. The heavens had to rise so the earth could breathe. And so, with Shu's wind in her lungs and stars in her skin, Nut became the silent guardian of a new order, one where gaps weren't wounds but sacred spaces. Now came the final architects of order, the Hair Gods, 8 primordial beings whose very existence thrummed with the pulse of eternity. As Nut's celestial bovine form settled into place, these deities took their positions at her 4 legs, their arms raised not in worship but in perpetual support. Imagine them as living pillars, muscles straining against the weight of the sky, their fingers splayed wide to distribute the burden. Each hair god bore the same name, yet they weren't mere copies. They were facets of a single cosmic truth, endless time. Their iconography tells the story. Tomb paintings depict them with tadpole-shaped bodies, symbols of the Ouroboros-like cycle they embodied, and palms turned upward as if to say, this is the price of infinity. But their role wasn't just physical. The hair gods became the unseen tempo keepers of Ra's journey. As his solar bark glided across Nut's belly each day, it was their synchronized breaths that steadied its path against the turbulent currents of the Duat. They didn't just hold up the sky, they calibrated its rhythms. Texts from the Book of the Dead describe them whispering coordinates to the constellations, adjusting the angle of Nut's ribs to account for solstices, ensuring the sun's light fell precisely where and when it was needed. This wasn't passive labor, it was divine engineering, a celestial clockwork maintained by beings who understood that time itself was a fragile construct. Here's where Egyptian cosmology reveals its genius. The hair gods didn't just mirror the physical world, they were its metaphysical scaffolding. Just as their arms propped up the heavenly cow, their essence underpinned the concept of Jet, the enduring, unchanging order behind creation. Farmers planting barley in the Nile's silt, scribes etching prayers onto tomb walls, even pharaohs drawing their first breaths, all existed within the framework these gods maintained. The symmetry is striking: 4 legs, 4 directions, 4 pillars of reality. North, south, east, and west weren't just compass points to the Egyptians, they were living dimensions, each upheld by a hair god's exhale. Yet beneath this order lurked a delicious paradox. The hair gods embodied eternity, but their task was inherently dynamic. Every sunrise demanded micro-adjustments, every eclipse a recalibration. This wasn't the static perfection of Greek ideals, it was a universe in delicate, constant negotiation. Even their imagery hints at this tension. In some reliefs, their knees bend slightly, as if bracing against unseen tremors. In others, their torsos twist to counterbalance Nut's movements. The message is clear: eternity isn't stillness, it's motion perfected. Archaeology offers haunting evidence of how deeply this belief seeped into daily life. Excavated temple foundations often contain deposits of hair amulets, tiny lapis lazuli figures buried at the cardinal points, literally anchoring sacred spaces to cosmic principles. And in the Valley of the Kings, the tombs of Seti I and Ramses IV feature ceiling maps where the hair god's limbs elongate to touch specific stars, turning burial chambers into celestial echo chambers. Death for the Egyptians wasn't an end. It was a transfer from one meticulously maintained axis to another. The brilliance of this system lies in its reciprocity. The hair gods didn't just serve Ra, they needed him. Without the sun's journey, their endless time would have no meaning. Without their support, his bark would capsize in the void. It's a dance of mutual dependence, one that mirrors the Nile's own cycle: floods nourishing the land, which in turn feeds the people whose prayers sustain the gods. No single element reigns supreme. Harmony emerges from the balance. Modern stargazers might find eerie familiarity here. Today's physicists speak of dark matter, the invisible scaffolding holding galaxies together. The hair gods were the ancients' answer to that unseen force, the dark matter of the Egyptian cosmos, their fingers pressing against the fabric of existence to keep it from fraying. And every night, as Ra's bark slipped beneath the horizon, their grip tightened just a fraction, ensuring the sky wouldn't buckle under the weight of his absence. For 12 perilous hours, they held the line against chaos until dawn proved their labor hadn't been in vain. As Ra's solar bark dips below the horizon each evening, it doesn't vanish into darkness, it plunges into the Duat, the underworld's labyrinthine expanse. But this isn't just a realm of shadows, it's a mirrored universe where every twist and turn reflects the trials of existence itself. The Duat's creation wasn't an afterthought. It was necessity carved into the cosmos, a response to humanity's rebellion and Ra's reluctant withdrawal. Picture it as a celestial workshop where the sun god's light is reforged nightly, its fires tested against chaos to emerge purified at dawn. This nightly descent stitches together 2 Egyptian traditions that might seem separate at first glance: Ra's solar cycle and Osiris's dominion over the dead. Before Osiris became lord of the underworld, the Duat was a formless void, a placeholder for the unknown. But when Set murdered his brother and scattered his remains, the Duat gained structure, a kingless kingdom awaiting its rightful ruler. Osiris's resurrection didn't just reclaim his throne, it transformed the underworld into a Chinese letter of divine justice, where hearts were weighed against Mat's feather. Yet here's the paradox: though Osiris rules the Duat, Ra must pass through it. Their journeys intertwine like braided rope. Osiris represents stasis, the eternal return of fertile soil. Ra embodies dynamism, the relentless pulse of time. Together, they balance the scales of existence. The Book of the Dead later reframed this duality for mortal souls. Spells etched on papyrus guided the deceased through the Duat's 12 gates, each mirroring an hour of Ra's nocturnal voyage. To navigate these trials was to trace the sun god's footsteps, borrowing his light to survive encounters with fire-breathing serpents and lakes of flame. Archaeologists have found amulets shaped like solar barks in tombs, miniature vessels meant to ferry the dead alongside Ra's crew. This wasn't mere symbolism, it was spiritual physics. If the sun could die and resurrect daily, so too could humanity. Yet Ra's journey through the Duat isn't a passive drift, it's a battle. Apophis, the serpent of oblivion, coils beneath the underworld's currents, waiting to swallow the bark whole. The gods aboard of perception, who authority and Heka magic aren't just passengers, they're the weapons Ra wields to repel chaos. Ja's keen eyes spot Apophis in the gloom, whose commands rally the crew, and Heka's spells stitch the serpent's wounds shut each time they strike. This nightly combat isn't just mythic drama, it's the engine of renewal. Every wound Ra inflicts on Apophis leaks primordial energy, which the Duat's denizens, spirits, demons, even the dead harvest to sustain their realms. The irony is profound. The same underworld humanity feared as a place of judgment also fed on the scraps of their god's struggle. Funerary texts describe blessed dead as those who live on the breath of Ra, his exhausted sighs as dawn approaches becoming their sustenance. Wall paintings in tombs like those of Nefertari show the deceased greeting the solar bark, their arms raised not in plea but in partnership. They understood the truth. Ra's victory each dawn wasn't guaranteed. It depended on the prayers of the living, the righteousness of the dead, and the fragile equilibrium Osiris maintained in his hall of justice. This interdependence birthed Egypt's most enduring rituals. Priests at Abydos reenacted Osiris's resurrection during festivals, while Theban temples timed ceremonies to coincide with Ra's passage through the Duat's darkest hour. Even domestic shrines held lamps lit from sunset to sunrise, tiny votive barks echoing the sun god's voyage. The message was clear: humanity hadn't been abandoned after the heavenly cow's ascent. They'd been given a role to tend the cosmic balance their ancestors had nearly shattered. The Duat, then, isn't just a destination. It's the crucible where destruction and rebirth fuse, where Ra's fire tempers mortal hope into something durable enough to outlast the night. Every sunrise since the first hasn't been a repetition but a reckoning, a god's choice again and again to endure the underworld's trials so his children might wake to another day. Humanity emerged from the ashes of Sekhmet's rampage forever altered, not just in numbers but in understanding. The survivors didn't rebuild their world as it had been, they rebuilt it as it needed to be. Gone were the days of casual proximity to the divine, of taking Ra's light for granted like breathable air. Now every sunrise carried the weight of a hard-won privilege, every harvested grain a testament to fragile forgiveness. The people who once whispered against Ra in shadowed corridors now knelt in open courtyards, their foreheads pressed to sun-warmed stone, not out of fear but recognition. They'd glimpsed the abyss, and it had taught them the value of the ledge. This new covenant between gods and mortals wasn't spelled out on papyrus or carved into temple walls, it was woven into the fabric of daily life. Where once humanity had shared meals with deities as if they were neighbors, now they honored them through ritual precision. Offerings of bread shaped like the Ankh, hymns timed to the sun's zenith, temple floors swept thrice daily to mirror Nut's celestial purity. These weren't empty gestures, they were the stitches holding the wound of separation closed, the tangible proof that humanity still remembered its place in the dance of Mat. The difference between pre- and post-destruction worship wasn't just intensity, it was intentionality. Every act of devotion became a spoke in the wheel of cosmic order, a counterbalance to chaos. Archaeology reveals how deeply this shift penetrated. Excavated household shrines from the New Kingdom show a stark evolution. where Old Kingdom altars held casual votives, a handful of dates, a child's clay figurine later ones bear meticulously inscribed prayers, miniature mat feathers carved from faience, even lunar calendars marking auspicious days for offerings. The trauma of divine wrath had turned worship from routine to reverence, but here's what's fascinating: this wasn't servitude. The Egyptians didn't grovel, they partnered. When a priest lifted incense to Ra at dawn, he wasn't just appeasing a distant god, he was fueling the engine of creation itself. Texts from Edfu Temple put it bluntly: without your voice, the sun stalls in the sky. The pharaoh's role crystallized as the linchpin of this balance. No longer just a ruler, he became the living conduit between realms, his coronation echoing Ra's first ascension to the heavens. On temple walls, we see him depicted not just leading battles or presiding over courts, but performing infinitesimally precise rituals measuring the angle of shadows to align with Nut's spine, anointing statues with oils whose recipes were said to have cooled Sekhmet's fury. The message was clear: one misstep, one forgotten hymn, and the fragile peace could shatter. Yet for all the formality, intimacy wasn't entirely lost. The Book of the Dead shows souls pleading their cases before Osiris with startling familiarity, calling him Father while listing their good deeds. Love poetry from Deir el-Medina compares lovers to Hathor and Horus, proof that divinity still permeated human relationships, just at a safer distance. Even the gods adapted. Ra no longer walked among mortals, but he sent dreams woven with guidance. Hathor's priests channeled her healing through sistrum music, transforming rage into rhythm. The relationship had grown more nuanced, like a parent who steps back to let a child learn from stumbles, but still whispers advice in the dark. This recalibration resonates far beyond ancient Egypt. Every culture carries its own version of the heavenly cow moment, the disaster that reshapes humanity's contract with the divine. The Greeks had Pandora's box, the Norse Ragnarok's twilight, the Abrahamic flood. But Egypt's myth stands apart because it doesn't end with punishment or paradise. It ends with responsibility. The people who survived Sekhmet's claws didn't just inherit a scarred world, they inherited its upkeep. And so do we. Every time we mistake stability for permanence, every time we bite the hand that feeds us, we replay their choice. The heavenly cow isn't just a warning. It's a mirror, and its reflection asks, what will we do with our place in the balance? The priests of ancient Egypt didn't just preserve the myth of the heavenly cow, they weaponized it. When the Nile ran low or plague scorched the land, they didn't see random misfortune. They saw Sekhmet's claws retracing their bloody path. Temple archives from Thebes reveal how these spiritual gatekeepers wielded the story like a scalpel, diagnosing divine displeasure in every cracked harvest and stillborn calf. A particularly vivid papyrus from the reign of Amenhotep III describes a pestilence that turned skin to lesions, a crisis the high priests attributed to neglected offerings at Sekhmet's shrines. Their solution, a festival where 7,000 red-clad priestesses shook sistrums in sync, their rattles mimicking the sound of bones breaking under lioness jaws. The message was clear: forget ritual and history would repeat, but this wasn't mere fear-mongering. The priests framed their interventions as cosmic first aid. Just as beer had pacified Sekhmet, so too could carefully measured devotion neutralize her lingering fury. During the annual Day of Pacifying Sekhmet, temple kitchens brewed crimson-tinted ale infused with mandrake, recreating the original sedative draft. Worshippers anointed statues with honey not as food for the goddess, but as symbolic bandages for wounds humanity had inflicted on Ra's heart. Even the timing of these rituals betrayed surgical precision. Plagues often peaked in summer when the Nile's receding waters left stagnant pools breeding disease. By linking epidemics to Sekhmet's solar fury, priests turned public health into sacred theater, their ceremonies coinciding with the lion star Sirius's heliacal rise. The genius of this system lay in its reciprocity. While the myth explained suffering, it also offered a roadmap to redemption. A damaged stela from Memphis details how priests would read Sekhmet's temper in the arrangement of plague boils clustered on the right arm signaled wrath over neglected warrior cults. Scattered across the torso meant grievances about temple tithes. These weren't arbitrary diagnoses. They reflected very real tensions between palace and priesthood, between field workers and the bureaucratic elite. By framing social strife as divine imbalance, the clergy positioned themselves as indispensable mediators. Who else could translate the gods' cryptic displeasure into actionable policy? Archaeology bears witness to the scale of this ideological machinery. At Karnak, excavators found caches of votive lioness claws, terracotta replicas offered by merchants fearing bankruptcy or mothers nursing sick children. Each claw bore a hieroglyphic plea, "Breathe softly." Even more telling are the execration texts, pottery shards inscribed with Sekhmet's name before being ritually shattered. These weren't acts of defiance but psychological release valves. By symbolically breaking the goddess's rage, devotees reaffirmed their role in maintaining cosmic order. Yet the priests' interpretations weren't monolithic. A rival tradition from Elephantine Island insisted Sekhmet's wrath manifested not through disease, but through the desert winds that choked the Nile with sand. Their solution, submerging her statues in river mud during storms, a ritual mirroring Ra's beer stratagem. This regional variation reveals the myth's adaptability. It wasn't a rigid doctrine, but a living framework for making sense of catastrophe. When the Hyksos invaders brought foreign plagues, Delta priests blended the heavenly cow narrative with Asiatic plague goddess lore, creating hybrid rituals where Sekhmet's priestesses wore Canaanite crescent amulets. Perhaps the most poignant twist comes from the workers' village at Deir el-Medina. Here, craftsmen who built royal tombs scribbled prayers on ostraka, identifying Sekhmet not just as a destroyer but as a reluctant healer. One text begs her to pour fury into the malachite cup, transforming rage into medicine. This grassroots reinterpretation captures the myth's ultimate resilience. It gave even the powerless agency. If suffering had rules, it could be negotiated, and if gods could be swayed by ritual, no disaster was truly random. The legacy of these interpretations lingers in modern epidemiology's language. When we speak of curbing outbreaks or mitigating crises, we echo the priests who treated chaos as a force to be bargained with, not conquered. Their greatest insight wasn't that gods caused plagues, but that meaning could temper terror. The story of Ra's wrath and humanity's near destruction isn't just an Egyptian anomaly. It's part of a global chorus of flood myths, survival tales, and divine reckonings. But where other cultures envision total annihilation by water, the Egyptian version pulses with fiery, solar fury. Take Noah's Ark, for instance. In the Hebrew Bible, Yahweh sends 40 days of rain to cleanse a corrupt world, sparing only one righteous family and pairs of animals. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh mirrors this almost beat for beat, with Utnapishtim building a massive ship to ride out Enlil's storm. Both stories share a common DNA: water as the instrument of judgment, a single survivor hero, and a covenant forged in the aftermath. Yet the Book of the Heavenly Cow flips the script. Here, the threat isn't drowning, it's incineration. Ra doesn't open the floodgates of heaven. He unleashes the eye of the sun, a force that scorches rebellion rather than submerging it. What makes the Egyptian account stand out isn't just its medium fire instead of water, but its moral ambiguity. In the Noah and Utnapishtim stories, the flood is a hard reset, wiping the slate clean of irredeemable wickedness. The ark becomes a floating bunker for virtue, but Sekhmet's rampage isn't about purity, it's about proportionality. Ra doesn't seek to erase humanity, he wants them to remember. The beer stratagem underscores this nuance. Unlike the totalizing floods that leave no room for negotiation, Ra's punishment is stoppable, correctable. Humanity isn't passive in its salvation, they participate in it, brewing the antidote to their own folly. This isn't a reboot, it's a recalibration. The solar focus adds another layer of uniqueness. Other deluge myths tie their catastrophes to lunar cycles or storm gods. The Egyptian apocalypse is timed to Ra's journey. Sekhmet's rampage peaks at midday when the sun is fiercest, and her pacification coincides with dusk, as if the cosmos itself syncs to solar rhythms. Even the aftermath diverges. Post-flood, Noah receives a rainbow, Utnapishtim gains immortality, but post-Sekhmet, humanity gets distance. The sky literally rises, creating a buffer between divine and mortal realms. This isn't a promise to never destroy again, it's a restructuring of the relationship. The lesson isn't be good or drown, but respect the gap or face the consequences. Archaeology reveals how deeply this solar framing permeated Egyptian thought. While Mesopotamians built ziggurats to reach the gods of rain and wind, Egypt's pyramids aligned with the solstices, their limestone casings designed to catch Ra's first light. Even their flood metaphor was solar. The Nile's annual inundation wasn't a destructive surge but a life-giving pulse, its silt famously black like the fertile soil of the Duat. Destruction and creation weren't opposites, they were phases of the same solar cycle. Yet the most striking parallel lies in what these myths reveal about their creators. Flood stories often reflect agrarian anxieties, unpredictable rains, failed crops. But Egypt's nightmare wasn't too much water, it was too much fire. The myth mirrors the existential dread of a civilization whose survival hinged on Ra's daily victory over chaos. No rain meant hunger, but no sun meant oblivion. The heavenly cow isn't just a warning against rebellion, it's a manifesto on interdependence. The same sun that grows barley can char it to ash. The same gods who nurture can devour, and humanity's role isn't to conquer or plead, but to balance, on the knife's edge between gratitude and hubris. These echoes across cultures aren't coincidental. They're proof that every civilization wrestles with the same questions. How much can we test the gods before they answer? And what does salvation cost? The Egyptians just painted their answers in starker colors, not with watercolors of renewal, but with the blood-red ochre of a beer-drenched dawn. Archaeological clues whisper that the Book of the Heavenly Cow may have been more than myth. It could have been a cultural memory, forged in the crucible of real catastrophe. One of the most tantalizing pieces of evidence is the famine stela, a granite slab erected on Sehel Island near Aswan, carved during the Ptolemaic period but claiming to record events from the Old Kingdom. It describes a 7-year famine so severe that Egyptians resorted to cannibalism. The cause, a negligent pharaoh who failed to honor Khnum, the ram-headed god controlling the Nile's floods. The parallels are striking. Just as Ra withdraws his light in the heavenly cow myth, here a god withholds fertility, punishing humanity's lapse in devotion. But the stela takes it further. It depicts priests intervening with rituals to pacify Khnum's anger, mirroring the beer offering stratagem used to calm Sekhmet. This isn't just coincidence, it's proof that the ancients saw divine retribution as an interpretable language, where suffering could be decoded and remedied through sacred protocol. Then there's the Theban plague records, etched onto temple walls during the reign of Amenhotep III. These vivid reliefs show priests leading processions of lioness statues through streets littered with the sick and dying, their chants begging Sekhmet to turn her face from wrath to healing. Archaeologists found remnants of red ochre pigment in these carvings, likely remnants of ritual beer offerings poured to replicate Ra's pacification of the goddess. Even more compelling are the medical papyri from this era, which prescribed remedies to cool the heat of Sekhmet for fevers and skin lesions, blending medicine with mythology. A prescription from the Ebers papyrus instructs healers to grind mandrake root into beer, a direct echo of the myth's sedative draught. The line between spiritual allegory and lived experience blurs here, suggesting the heavenly cow narrative may have been shaped by collective trauma, perhaps a devastating epidemic that burned through the population like divine fire. But the most visceral evidence comes from the ruins of Akhenaten, the short-lived capital of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, when he abandoned the traditional gods to worship the Aten, a singular solar disk. The backlash was swift. After his death, priests systematically dismantled his city, erasing his name from monuments as if he'd never ruled. Among the rubble, archaeologists found fragments of a previously unknown hymn describing the Aten's light as a slaughterer's blade, cutting down those who strayed from its path. The language is eerily similar to Sekhmet's rampage, as if Akhenaten's opponents rewrote his solar devotion as a cautionary tale. A broken statue base discovered nearby bears the remnants of a scene where figures drown in a river of red liquid, not Nile water, but something thicker, darker. Could this be artistic license or a folk memory of some long-forgotten disaster? The archaeological record grows even more haunting when we examine climate data. Core samples from the Nile Delta reveal layers of silt interspersed with abrupt bands of scorched earth, dated to around 2200 BC, roughly the time of the first intermediate period when Egypt fractured into chaos. Pollen analysis shows a sudden shift from cereal grains to drought-resistant weeds, suggesting years of failed floods, and then there's the charcoal. Thick strata of it concentrated in settlements along the river's edge. Some scholars argue this points to widespread fires, possibly sparked by lightning strikes during arid years. Imagine the terror: crops withering, the Nile shrinking to a trickle, then flames consuming mud-brick homes as if the sun itself had fallen to earth. It's not hard to see how such trauma could birth a story about a sun god's wrath manifesting as a fire-breathing lioness. Yet the most poignant artifact might be a humble ostracon found in a Deir el-Medina worker's hut. On it, a scribble in red ink, a stick-figure lioness chasing stick-figure humans with a child's clumsy hieroglyphs below reading, "Mama says don't look at Sekhmet's shadow." This wasn't elite theology, it was lived fear passed from parent to child like a folk warning. The heavenly cow myth wasn't just carved onto temple walls, it lived in the breath of everyday people, shaping how they understood suffering. When the Nile ran low or fever swept through a village, they didn't see random misfortune. They saw the echoes of Ra's grief, the ghost of choices made millennia ago. And in that gap between myth and memory, archaeology gives us something extraordinary. Not proof that the story was true, but evidence of why it had to be told. Nut's transformation into the heavenly cow wasn't just a visual spectacle, it was a tapestry of layered symbolism, woven from threads of fertility, cosmic order, and the life-giving chaos of the primordial flood. To the ancient Egyptians, cows weren't just livestock, they were living metaphors. Picture a nursing mother, her udders swollen with milk, and you'll grasp why bovine imagery saturated their cosmology. Nut's arched body, stretched taut across the sky, mirrored the gentle curve of a cow's belly, her star-studded hide symbolizing the Milky Way's celestial river. But this wasn't merely decorative. Every detail, from the position of her legs to the undulations of her spine, encoded a deeper truth about creation's fragile balance. The fertility connection runs deeper than mere sustenance. In temple reliefs, Nut's cow form often drips with cascading milk, a visual echo of the Nile's inundation. Just as a cow's milk nourishes her calf, Nut's celestial fluids rain, sunlight, even the tears of gods nourished the earth. Archaeologists have unearthed amulets shaped like dairy vessels in fertility shrines, inscribed with spells invoking Nut's white waters to bless barren women. But the cow's symbolism wasn't just about abundance, it was about cyclical renewal. A cow's gestation period, roughly 9 months, mirrored the Nile's flood cycle, linking Nut's bovine form to the rhythm of seasons. When priests chanted hymns to the heavenly cow during the inundation, they weren't just praying for rain, they were aligning earthly fertility with cosmic rhythms. Now zoom out to the sky associations. Nut's 4 legs didn't just prop up the firmament, they mapped the cardinal directions, each hoof pressing into a different horizon. Tomb paintings from the New Kingdom show her limbs shimmering with hieroglyphs representing north, south, east, and west, transforming her into a living compass. But the real genius lies in her flexibility. Unlike rigid stone pillars, a cow's legs bend, adjust, absorb shocks. This wasn't static architecture, it was dynamic equilibrium. When earthquakes rattled the Nile Valley, priests interpreted them as nuts shifting her weight, her bovine form absorbing cosmic tremors to spare the earth below. Enter Mehitweti, the great flood cow goddess often depicted as Nut's precursor or alter ego. Where Nut embodied the sky, Mehitweti represented the celestial Nile, a river of stars believed to mirror the earthly Nile's life-giving floods. Pyramid texts describe her as the mother of Ra, her udders dispensing not milk but the primordial waters of Nun, the chaos from which creation emerged. Here, the cow symbolism takes a darker turn. Mehitweti wasn't just gentle nourishment, she was the deluge before the order, the wild potential that both terrified and sustained. In Esna temple carvings, she's shown submerged up to her withers in swirling currents, her horns piercing the heavens like dual moons. This duality, nurturer and destroyer, mirrors Sekhmet's transformation, but with a crucial difference. Where Sekhmet's rage was reactive, Mehitweti's power was elemental, inevitable. The interplay between Nut and Mehitweti reveals how the Egyptians reconciled chaos and order. During the annual flood, priests performed rituals where two cow statues, one painted blue for Nut, the other red for Mehitweti, were floated on the Nile. As the currents entwined them, it symbolized the necessary marriage of structure and turbulence. Too much Mehitweti and villages drowned, too much Nut and the land parched. Balance wasn't the absence of chaos, but the harnessed rhythm between opposites. Modern astronomers might chuckle at the idea of a celestial cow, but the ancients weren't naive. They observed real patterns, the Milky Way's Milky Band, the way certain stars returned with the floods, and encoded them into theology. Nut's bovine form was their way of saying the universe wasn't just vast, it was alive, breathing, nursing. And like any good mother, she could nourish or withdraw her gifts depending on how her children behaved. The heavenly cow wasn't a fairy tale. It was a user manual for existence, written in the language of udders and horizons. Sekhmet's rampage may have ended with her transformation back into Hathor, but her presence never truly left Egypt. Far from fading into myth, she evolved into something far more complex, a deity whose fury could be harnessed, whose wrath could be negotiated. Nowhere is this duality more evident than in the hundreds of granite statues commissioned by Amenhotep III at Thebes. These weren't mere tributes, they were spiritual firebreaks erected to contain the goddess's destructive potential by honoring it. Picture row upon row of lion-headed figures lining temple courtyards, each one carved with meticulous detail, the curve of a claw, the ripple of muscle beneath stone. These Sekhmets weren't snarling. They sat regal, composed, their hands resting on their knees as if the act of sculpting had frozen their violence mid-strike. But the genius of Amenhotep's project lay in its subtle subversion. By mass-producing Sekhmet's image, he didn't just placate her, he domesticated her. Each statue functioned like a lightning rod for divine anger, absorbing plague and misfortune before it could reach the people. Archaeologists have found traces of red ochre in the crevices of these monuments, remnants of ritual anointings where priests whispered, "Turn your face from wrath to healing." Thebes became a city under celestial quarantine, its streets patrolled not by soldiers but by stone sentinels holding the line between order and chaos. Yet Sekhmet's cult spread far beyond royal vanity projects. In the back alleys of Memphis, potters molded tiny lioness amulets from Nile clay, their surfaces etched with spells to cool the heat of fever. Medical papyri prescribed reciting Sekhmet's name 7 times over wound dressings, as if her venom could be reversed through incantation. At Kam Ombo, a temple doubled as a hospital where the sick slept beneath frescoes of the goddess suckling pharaohs. a stark visual paradox pairing destruction with nurture. Even the annual Festival of Drunkenness saw women dance with braided lioness manes, their bodies swaying to sistrum rhythms that mimicked the sound of bones breaking. The message was clear: Sekhmet couldn't be erased, but she could be redirected. What's fascinating is how her worship adapted to crisis. When the Hittites sent plague-riddled prisoners across the border, Ramses II didn't just quarantine the infected. He ordered Sekhmet priests to bury ceramic bowls at crossroads, each one painted with the goddess's eyes closed in sleep. During the Amarna period, when Akhenaten rejected traditional gods, commoners secretly buried Sekhmet figurines beneath their thresholds, as if her suppressed fury might protect them from the sun disk's singular glare. This wasn't blind fear, it was a sophisticated understanding of divine ecology. Just as fire clears brush for new growth, Sekhmet's scorching presence made space for renewal. The ultimate testament to her endurance lies in her contradictions. At Karnak, archaeologists unearthed a cache of healing statues showing Sekhmet cradling a papyrus scepter, the symbol of Lower Egypt's lush marshes, while her other hand grips a scimitar. The inscriptions don't soften her, they bargain with her. Burn away the sickness, not the soul, one pleads. Another offers this chilling compromise: take the guilty, spare the penitent. Here lies the heart of her legacy. Sekhmet wasn't tamed, she was respected, her capacity for annihilation acknowledged as the flip side of her power to cleanse. Modern excavators still find her fingerprints in unexpected places. A child's wooden rattle shaped like her head, its hollow body filled with poppy seeds to lull feverish infants. A merchant's ledger from Elephantine listing payments to Sekhmet's priestesses during a malaria outbreak. Even now, when epidemics strike Egyptian villages, some elders whisper old prayers to the Lady of Pestilence, proof that some forces are too potent to fade, even after millennia. Sekhmet's cult never died, it just learned to breathe fire without burning the world down. Ra's ascent to the heavens didn't just change his address, it rewrote the rules of existence. When he climbed onto Nut's back, the sun ceased to be merely a blazing disk in the sky and became something far more profound, a bridge between the tangible and the transcendent. The Egyptians had always revered the sun's life-giving power, but now it pulsed with layers of meaning. It was no longer just Ra's chariot, it was his very essence radiating divinity in every beam. This shift birthed a theological revolution, blending the physical sun with the spiritual force behind it, a duality that would later crystallize in the worship of Amun-Ra and even inspire Akhenaten's radical devotion to the Aten. Consider the practical implications of this celestial move. Before the heavenly cow's transformation, Ra's presence was immediate, his authority palpable in the warmth of a farmer's skin or the light filtering through papyrus screens. But now his light became a metaphor for divine inaccessibility. The sun's journey across Nut's belly mirrored Ra's emotional withdrawal, close enough to sustain life, yet too distant to touch. Temples adapted to this new reality. Their designs shifted to emphasize the sun's path, with obelisks acting as stone sundials and sanctuary corridors aligned to catch the first rays of dawn. At Karnak, priests charted the sun's solstice positions with eerie precision, their rituals timed to the minute, as if pleading with Ra to remember his children below. This dimensional shift also redefined Ra's identity. In the Old Kingdom, he was a warrior king, his battles against Apophis framed as physical clashes. Post-ascent, his struggles became metaphysical. The Duat wasn't just an underworld, it was a cosmic testing ground where Ra's light faced annihilation each night. His survival wasn't guaranteed, it depended on the prayers of the living, the righteousness of the dead, and the fragile balance of Ma'at. The sun's daily resurrection became a collective triumph, proof that humanity's devotion could tip the scales against chaos. The theological ripples extended to Ra's fusion with Amun, the hidden god of Thebes. Amun-Ra wasn't just a political compromise to unite northern and southern cults. He was the inevitable result of Ra's celestial exile. Ammon embodied the unseen, the omnipresent force behind the visible sun. Together, they represented the full spectrum of divinity, the blazing disk and the infinite darkness it emerged from. Temple hymns celebrated this duality, calling Ammon Ra, the one who hides in light, a paradox that captured the sun's new role as both beacon and mystery. And then there's the Aten, the solar disk worshipped by Akhenaten. Often mistaken as a monotheistic innovation, the Aten cult was actually the logical extreme of Ra's dimensional shift. By stripping away anthropomorphic imagery, no falcon-headed god, no bark, just pure light, Akhenaten distilled Ra's essence to its most abstract form. The Amarna hymns describe the Aten's rays as hands caressing the earth, a poetic echo of Ra's nurturing warmth from afar. But here's the irony. In trying to reject traditional polytheism, Akhenaten amplified the very idea Ra's ascent had introduced, that the sun was more than a celestial body. It was love and wrath, justice and chaos, bound together in golden light. The legacy of Ra's dimensional shift endures in unexpected places. Modern astronomers mapping the sun's corona might not invoke his name, but they grapple with the same duality. A fiery ball of gas that also governs time, seasons, and life itself. The Egyptians understood what science would later confirm. The sun isn't just an object in the sky, it's a relationship, and Ra's journey to the heavens taught them that sometimes divinity isn't in the closeness, but in the careful, necessary distance. The myth of the heavenly cow didn't survive as a well-known scripture like the Book of the Dead or the Pyramid text. It lingered in fragments, scattered across tomb walls and half-erased steles, waiting to be pieced together like a divine jigsaw puzzle. One of the most crucial discoveries came from the tomb of Seti I in the Valley of the Kings, where a stunning ceiling mural depicted Nut as the celestial cow, her star-studded belly arched over the sun god's bark. The colors were so vivid after 3,000 years that the blue of her hide still evoked the depth of the night sky. But this wasn't just art, it was a cosmological blueprint. The accompanying hieroglyphs detailed Ra's ascent and Sekhmet's rampage in passages so precise they became the Rosetta Stone for reconstructing the entire myth. Yet its absence from earlier texts like the Pyramid texts is telling. Those sacred spells, etched into burial chambers of the Old Kingdom, focus on the pharaoh's journey to join the gods, not their fraught relationship with humanity. The heavenly cow's themes of rebellion and divine retreat simply didn't fit that narrative. It wasn't until the New Kingdom, an era marked by political upheaval and foreign invasions, that the myth resurged. Perhaps the chaos of the time made its message resonate. The gods were no longer taken for granted. Archaeologists have traced the myth's revival to a specific moment, the reign of Hatshepsut, when temple reliefs began featuring Sekhmet not just as a destroyer, but as a goddess whose fury could be redirected through ritual. A Karnak priest's ledger from her era lists offerings of red beer and honey cakes to she who heals as she harms, a direct callback to the heavenly cow's pacification. The myth wasn't just remembered, it was repurposed, its lessons applied to real-world crises like plagues and droughts. The most tantalizing clues, though, come from marginalized sources. Workers' graffiti in Deir el-Medina scribbled prayers to the cow who separates earth from sky, proving the story circulated beyond elite circles. Even foreign diplomats referenced it. A cuneiform letter from Babylon's king to Akhenaten mentions the sun god's flight, suggesting the myth's themes had crossed borders. What's remarkable is how modern Egyptologists had to stitch this narrative together from disparate fragments. A section in the tomb of Ramses III here, a passing reference in a medical papyrus there. Like Ra's journey through the Duat, the myth itself had to be reassembled each night from scattered light. Its survival isn't just a testament to ancient scribes, it's proof that some stories, no matter how fragmented, refuse to die. At its core, the myth of the heavenly cow isn't just about gods and mortals. It's a psychological blueprint for how societies process their own fragility. Look closely and you'll see it mirrors the stages of collective trauma. First, the golden age of stability, where abundance breeds complacency. Then the rupture, when buried tensions erupt into violence. Finally, the painful recalibration, where survivors rebuild not just their world, but their understanding of it. The Egyptians didn't record this story to frighten children. They etched it into temples because they recognized a universal truth: civilizations, like individuals, must confront their capacity for self-destruction before they can truly heal. Consider the parallels in our own history. The fall of Rome wasn't just about barbarian invasions. It was about a society so accustomed to dominance that it mistook its own infrastructure for immortality. The French Revolution didn't erupt spontaneously. It fermented in decades of inequality where the aristocracy, like Ra's court, failed to see how their disconnection fueled resentment. Even climate change follows this arc. We've basked in the golden age of industrialization, only to face the Sekhmet like fury of wildfires and hurricanes. The ancient myth's genius lies in its diagnosis. Collapse rarely comes from external threats alone. It's the rot within, the unexamined belief that the structures sustaining us are invincible, that does the deepest damage. Yet the story's real power emerges in its aftermath. Unlike apocalyptic tales where wrath erases everything, the heavenly cow myth insists on continuity. Ra doesn't obliterate humanity, he retreats, creating space for a new kind of relationship. This mirrors psychology's concept of post-traumatic growth, the idea that survivors often forge deeper meaning from catastrophe. After plagues ravaged medieval Europe, art flourished with memento mori motifs, reminding viewers of life's fragility. The Black Death survivors demanded fair wages, seeding early labor movements. Like the Egyptians who rebuilt under Nut's distant sky, these societies didn't just recover, they transformed. The myth also taps into humanity's fraught relationship with authority. Ra isn't some capricious tyrant, he's a weary parent, heartbroken by betrayal but unwilling to sever ties completely. This duality resonates across cultures. The Greek Prometheus defies Zeus to give fire to humanity, enduring eternal torment, yet the Olympian never revokes the gift. In the biblical Exodus, Yahweh's wrath at the golden calf gives way to renewed covenants. Even secular revolutions often replace one hierarchy with another, unable to escape the need for structure. The Egyptians understood this tension instinctively. Their pharaohs weren't just rulers, they were mediators, bridging the gap between human fallibility and divine perfection. Modern psychology might frame Ra's withdrawal as healthy boundary setting. A parent who cuts off a toxic child entirely risks perpetuating cycles of pain, but one who steps back while leaving the door ajar, that's the fragile space where growth happens. The heavenly cow myth doesn't offer easy answers, it presents a brutal but necessary truth. Trust, once fractured, can't be restored to what it was. It must evolve into something more resilient, if more distant. The sky doesn't return to its original height. Nut's arched spine becomes the new normal. Perhaps that's why this myth endures. It's not a warning against rebellion, but a meditation on consequences. The Egyptians knew that to challenge the divine, or the natural order, wasn't inherently wrong. But they also recognized that every act of defiance sends ripples through the fabric of existence. The question isn't whether we'll face our own Sekhmets, but whether we'll have the wisdom to brew the beer before it's too late. The myth of the heavenly cow didn't just linger in ancient scrolls, it prowled into modern pop culture, reshaping itself for new audiences while keeping its cosmic warnings intact. Take Age of Mythology, the strategy game where players command gods and monsters. Here, Sekhmet isn't just a background deity, she's a playable force, her lioness avatar unleashing plagues on enemy towns. The game cleverly taps into her dual nature, her special ability, Eye of Ra, scorches foes but leaves allied units unharmed, mirroring the myth's theme of targeted divine retribution. Even the way she's unlocked echoes the original story. Players must first endure a disaster like crop failure before gaining her favor. It's a subtle nod to how the ancients saw her, both destroyer and protector, wrathful yet negotiable. Comics, too, have mined the myth's tension between celestial order and chaos. Marvel's Moon Knight series reimagines Khonshu, the moon god, as a volatile deity with parallels to Ra's withdrawal. In one arc, Khonshu's avatar, Mark Spector, grapples with visions of a celestial bovine, a clear homage to Nut's arched form, while battling cultists who seek to lower the sky and restore direct divine rule. The metaphor isn't subtle. Just as Ra retreated to preserve balance, Khonshu's erratic interventions force Moon Knight to question whether gods should meddle at all. Even the art style leans into the myth's duality. Panels shift from golden, sun-drenched hues to bloody crimson when Sekhmet's influence bleeds into Khonshu's actions. Novels have taken even bolder liberties. Rick Riordan's The Kane Chronicles transplants the Heavenly Cow narrative into a modern teen adventure, where siblings Carter and Sadie Kane confront Ra as a senile old man drifting in the Duat. The twist, his withdrawal, wasn't just about humanity's rebellion. It was a strategic retreat to prevent his own exhaustion from unraveling creation. Riordan's Ra isn't vengeful, he's weary, echoing the myth's undercurrent of divine vulnerability. Meanwhile, N.K. Jemison's The Broken Earth trilogy, though not Egyptian, borrows the myth's structural tension. A grieving mother goddess analogous to Nut literally holds the sky aloft while her children's wars threaten to collapse it. The parallels are deliberate. Both stories explore how authority must sometimes distance itself to prevent total annihilation. Even indie games like Horus Heresy, Legions weave the myth into card mechanics. The Heavenly Cow card acts as a barrier, shielding players' health but permanently reducing their maximum HP, a perfect metaphor for Nut's sacrifice. Use it and you're trading safety for limits, just as Ra traded proximity for stability. These adaptations aren't just Easter eggs for mythology buffs, they're proof of the story's raw adaptability. Whether as a game mechanic, a graphic novel's visual motif, or a novel's emotional core, the Heavenly Cow myth endures because its themes hubris, consequence, the cost of divine love are universal. What's fascinating is how these retellings refract the myth through contemporary anxieties. In Age of Mythology, Sekhmet's plague ability resonates in a post-pandemic world. Moon Knight's Khonshu channels modern debates about authoritarianism masked as protection, and Riordan's senile Ra reflects aging populations and the transfer of power between generations. The ancients might not have foreseen video games or comic books, but they'd recognize the questions these stories raise. How much should the gods intervene? When does mercy become weakness? And what happens when the sky we take for granted finally snaps back? The story of the Heavenly Cow doesn't truly end its spirals, completing cycles only to begin anew. From Golden Age to rebellion, from divine wrath to fragile reconciliation, the myth pulses with the rhythms of existence itself. Order begets complacency, complacency invites chaos, and chaos, when met with wisdom, gives way to renewal. This isn't just a sequence of events, it's the heartbeat of Egyptian cosmology, a truth carved into temple walls and whispered in funeral rites. The gods could have erased humanity entirely, reduced the world to ash and silence. Instead, they chose distance, a celestial compromise where the sun still rises but never again touches the earth. There's profound warning in this pattern. Power, whether divine or mortal, isn't inherently destructive, but unchecked, unappreciated, it festers. Ra's light nurtured civilization until it was taken for granted, until whispers of rebellion drowned out hymns of gratitude. And when the balance tipped, the fallout wasn't just punishment, it was inevitability. The myth forces us to ask, how thin is the line between reverence and revolt? How many societies have crumbled not from external conquest, but from the rot of their own entitlement? The Egyptians knew the answer. Their tombs and temples repeat it like a mantra: Mat is not given. It's sustained, yet for all its darkness, the story's core is oddly hopeful. Renewal isn't just possible, it's woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Sekhmet's claws become Hathor's healing hands. Ra's retreat creates space for humanity to grow, to earn the light they once demanded. Even Nut's endless stretch across the sky isn't abandonment. It's a mother lifting a child from a fire, knowing the distance alone might save them. The lesson lingers like dawn mist. Destruction is never the last word, but neither is forgiveness unconditional. This myth echoes far beyond the Nile. Every culture has its apocalypse, floods, fires, frost stories where gods reset the world like a scribe scraping clean a papyrus, but the heavenly cow stands apart. It doesn't promise paradise after punishment or pretend wrath erases all debts. It offers something starker, truer, a universe where survival depends on remembering our place in the balance. Where power, divine or mortal, is a covenant, not a crown. So what do you think? Does this ancient warning resonate in other myths or even in our modern world? Share your favorite apocalyptic tales in the comments, and let's unravel how civilizations across time grappled with the same truths. After all, the stars Nut wears on her belly still shine tonight. And beneath them, the dance of order and chaos continues.